Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive. Today we're tackling the IELTS speaking test, and I've got some really cool tips to share with you.
Sounds good.
We'll be looking at this awesome YouTube video by Keith.
Okay.
He's an English language coach with a channel called English Speaking Success.
Yeah.
And the video we're diving into is called 35th IELTS High Score. It's packed with practical advice, and honestly, I think even if you're not prepping for IELTS, there's some really good stuff in here for anyone who wants to sound more natural and confident when they speak English.
Definitely. And
Yeah.
that's something Keith really emphasizes, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's not about memorizing robotic answers or anything like that.
Right.
He's all about helping you sound like yourself, just, the best, most fluent version of yourself.
Exactly. And I love how he uses so many real life examples and phrases.
Oh, totally. Like when he talks about the where you live section,
Yeah.
use this phrase, born and bred, which is just so perfect.
Yeah. It's so much more interesting than just saying I'm from.
Right. It's like you're instantly adding this local flavor to your speech.
And he even breaks down the pronunciation, like how the and in born and bred often sounds more like un.
Oh, yeah. I noticed that. It's those little nuances that really make a difference.
Totally. It's what makes you sound like a native speaker.
Okay, so let's talk about some other phrases Keith recommends. What really stood out to you?
Well, there's this one from the work section. I find my work challenging, but rewarding.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one.
And what I love is how he demonstrates using pauses and intonation to make it sound more fluent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like you're not just rushing through it.
Exactly. And he has this tip about stretching the word challenging slightly.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
It's like challenging.
Yeah. It sounds so much more relaxed and natural.
Okay, what about hobbies? Did any phrases jump out at you from that section?
Well, he starts with this really simple phrase, I don't get up too much in my free time.
Right, which a lot of people might actually say.
Yeah, exactly. But he stresses that you shouldn't just stop there.
Of course, you got to elaborate.
Exactly, like why you don't have much free time or what you'd like to do if you had more time.
It's about showing that you can actually hold a conversation, even about something simple.
Totally. And I like how he suggests using the present perfect continuous tense for hobbies you've been doing for a while.
Oh, yeah, I've been really into photography lately.
Exactly. It's a subtle way to showcase your grammar skills without sounding forced.
And for people who are more active, I think he gave some examples like, I recently got into yoga, and I'm really enjoying it.
Yes. And I'm considering taking up the drums.
Right. Again, it's all about practicing the pronunciation and intonation to make it sound natural.
Exactly. It's like he's giving you this toolbox of phrases that you can adapt and personalize.
Exactly. It's not about sounding like a robot. It's about sounding like you, but, more fluent and confident.
Absolutely. And then he even introduces some more complex structures like the second conditional.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
He uses the example, if I could, I'd love to travel to Nigeria, which is a great way to add some sophistication to your speech.
I see. It shows that you're not afraid to use a variety of grammar structures.
Right. And it makes your language more interesting to listen to.
So it's like Keith is saying, hey, don't be afraid to use a little bit of fancy grammar, but make sure it sounds natural.
Exactly.
And he's got some great phrases for talking about family, too.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, I really like how he uses the idiom close-knit family.
Oh, that's a good one.
And he also talks about how important it is to give specific examples and anecdotes.
Yeah, that's key.
Like instead of just saying, I have a great relationship with my siblings, you could tell a story about something fun you did together.
Right. That makes it so much more engaging for the listener.
It's like you're painting a picture with words.
Totally.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. What's the key takeaway for our listeners who are prepping for the IELTS?
I think it's that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Keith's video gives you this amazing collection of phrases and techniques that you can adapt and personalize to fit your own experiences and interests.
That's like he's giving you a head start.
Right. And by practicing these phrases and focusing on your pronunciation and intonation, you can really boost your confidence and impress those examiners.
Okay, awesome. So let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll dive into some more of Keith's tips, including what to do if you get stumped during the test.
Sounds good. It's like he's saying, look, you don't have to be Shakespeare.
Right.
You just got to be able to express yourself clearly and naturally.
Exactly. And you know what else I love?
What's that?
He actually gives some good phrases for talking about health and fitness.
Oh, yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Like one of the examples he gives is, I'm a firm believer in doing daily exercise.
Right. Which is a pretty good starting point.
Yeah, and it shows you can use collocations.
Yes.
You know?
Right. Firm believer.
Exactly.
That's what makes you sound more fluent. Totally. Oh, and remember that funny one he gave about health?
The one with the knocking on wood?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've not had any serious illnesses to date, touch wood.
I love that.
I could totally picture myself saying that in the exam.
Me too. And it's good to show a little bit of personality.
Absolutely. It makes you more memorable.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, but let's get real for a second. What happens if you totally blank during the test?
Oh, that's a nightmare, isn't it?
Totally. Like your mind just goes blank and you can't remember any of those fancy phrases.
Well, Keith has some advice for that too.
Oh, good, because I was getting worried.
He says even if you don't know much about the topic, it's better to say something than nothing.
Okay, that makes sense.
So he suggests using those clarification phrases we talked about earlier.
Oh, right. Like, could you repeat that? Or can you explain what you mean?
Exactly. It buys you some time to think.
That's so smart.
Yeah.
And it shows you're engaged, right?
Yeah. You're not just sitting there in silence.
Plus, it demonstrates your ability to handle, like, unexpected situations.
Yeah. Which is a good skill to have in general, not just for the IELTS.
Okay, so we've covered what to do if you blank, but what about expressing opinions?
Ah, yes. That's another tricky one.
Because everyone always says, I think.
Right. Which can get repetitive.
Totally. So what does Keith recommend?
Well, he suggests using a variety of phrases to introduce your viewpoint, like, the way I see it.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Or, to my mind.
I like that. It sounds more sophisticated.
Yeah, and my personal favorite is, I would have to say.
Ooh, that's nice. It sounds very polite and thoughtful.
Right, like you've really considered the issue.
It shows you're not just blurting out the first thing that comes to mind.
Exactly.
So I guess the takeaway here is that there are so many different ways to express your opinions in English.
And the more variety you use, the better?
Absolutely. It keeps your language interesting, and it shows the examiners that you have a good command of English.
Okay, so we've talked about expressing opinions, but what about those times when you need to agree or disagree with something?
Yeah, that's another common situation in the speaking test.
So instead of just saying, I agree or I disagree, Keith suggests using phrases like, I see your point.
Oh, that's a good one because you can use it even if you don't fully agree.
Exactly. It shows you're listening and considering the other person's perspective.
Right. And if you want to express strong agreement, he suggests saying something like, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. That's a really emphatic way to show that you're on the same page.
Totally. And for disagreement, I like how he uses, I see what you're saying, but...
Yes. It's a polite way to introduce a different perspective.
And it avoids sounding too confrontational.
Exactly. It's all about being respectful while still expressing your own viewpoint.
Okay, so to sum up this section, I think Keith's advice is all about finding that balance between being polite and being assertive.
Right. You want to show that you're confident in your opinions, but you also don't want to come across as rude or arrogant.
Absolutely. And that's a skill that will serve you well beyond the IELTS exam.
Oh, definitely. It's useful for any kind of communication, whether it's personal or professional.
Now, what about those situations where you just don't understand the question? Like maybe the examiner uses a word you've never heard before, or the question is just really complex.
Oh, yes, that's a tough one. But don't panic. Keith has some strategies for that, too.
Oh, thank goodness.
He says it's perfectly okay to ask for clarification.
Really?
Yeah, you can say something like, I'm sorry, could you rephrase the question? Or could you explain what you mean by?
I see. So it's better to ask for help than to just sit there and guess.
Exactly. The examiners understand that English isn't your first language, and they're not trying to trick you.
That's reassuring to know.
And it also shows that you're proactive and that you're willing to communicate.
Okay, so what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What should they remember if they find themselves in this situation?
Don't be afraid to ask for clarification. It's better to be sure you understand the question than to give an irrelevant answer.
Good advice. And remember, even if you make a few mistakes, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, the examiners are looking at your overall performance, not just individual errors.
So relax, take a deep breath, and do your best.
And remember to have fun. The IELTS speaking test is an opportunity to show off your English skills and to share your thoughts and experiences.
Exactly. It's not an interrogation.
It's a conversation.
So try to enjoy it. So it's like Keith is giving you permission to be yourself.
Right.
And to actually enjoy the process.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, it's all about communication.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I have a question that's been on my mind.
Okay, shoot.
We've talked about all these amazing phrases from Keith's video, but what about the phrases that our listeners use every day?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Like, what are some of the things they say naturally And how can they make sure those phrases sound good for the IELTS?
That's a great question.
Because it's not about memorizing a whole new script, right?
No, definitely not.
It's about taking the language you already use and just polishing it up a bit.
Exactly. So I would say think about the situations you encounter regularly, like ordering food or talking about your hobbies.
Describing your work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And pay attention to how you say those things.
Like really listen to yourself.
Yes. And then you can start to work on your pronunciation and intonation.
So it's like taking those everyday phrases and making them IELTS ready.
Precisely. And the more you practice, the more natural it will become.
Absolutely. It's all about building those good habits.
So there you have it, folks, our deep dive into Keith's IELTS speaking wisdom. We hope you found it helpful and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from pronunciation and intonation to those all-important phrases and what to do if you get stumped during the test.
And remember, it's not just about the IELTS. These are communication skills that will benefit you in all areas of life.
So keep practicing, keep experimenting, and most importantly, keep speaking English.
You got this.
That's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and good luck on your IELTS journey.